Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Carney did the impossible last night. Mark Carney walked away from Donald Trump's table, suspended the trade talks, and recalled the Canadian negotiators from Washington back to Ottawa. This isn't a small move. This is a very difficult move for Canadians, for Americans. And he goes one step further and says that he's going to match Trump's 50% tariffs on $28 billion of Canadian goods. The deal didn't collapse because Trump changed his mind. This time it was different. This time the deal actually collapsed because of one man, and his name is Howard Lutnick. He's the U.S. Commerce Secretary, and according to reporting from CBC News and the Globe and Mail, 4 separate sources with knowledge of the closed-door talks actually said that Lutnick himself inserted himself in the deal last week and saying that we were being too soft, the Americans, and specifically pushed back against the auto tariffs, taking it down from 25 to 15. He wanted a tougher deal, and what he got was a broken deal. Now, this isn't the first time Howard Lutnick has came out against Canada. He's actually been doing this a bunch of times. In April, at the Economic Summit in Washington, Lutnick was asked about Canada's negotiating strategy, and he said, direct quotes, "That's the worst strategy I've ever heard of. They suck." Straight up. He actually said that we as Canadians, our strategy sucks. Then he mocks the Prime Minister by name, quote, "Carney has a problem with us. He gets on a plane and he goes to China. Does he think China is going to buy his stuff?" And that was April. This is August. And the man who called Canada trash on stage in Washington is the same man who blew up our deal at the last minute. So this isn't diplomacy. From what I can surmise here, this is just a straight up personal grudge with a title.
What the hell happened in that meeting? This is all going viral online.
Was Howard Lutnick's involvement in the last days an impediment to getting a deal?
It's a question for the U.S. administration. Ultimately, I'm responsible for the decisions of the Canadian government. We take it as a cabinet, but I certainly bear those responsibilities, and so the head of the U.S. administration, the president, bears responsibility for the decisions they take. But I will say this, which is that the Canadian team unified the individuals you see here, their team members, our ambassador in Washington, my chief of staff, unified, talking together, the clerk of the Privy Council, everyone in the loop, everyone knows what our objectives are, collective decision making. As I say, ultimately, I and the cabinet bear responsibility for those decisions, but unity. You cannot say that about the United States administration. And as a consequence, last point, and I'll go to your colleagues, because I think this is important. In these last few days, we were drilling down on specific issues where that might have been papered over, the differences in the administration, if there were indeed differences. Ultimately, there's a decision maker at the top. And in drilling down on those, a number of those issues that I just referenced became very clear, and there was not a deal that we would sign. Thank you.
There it is. So says the U.S. is an absolute mess. My guess is they start negotiating with one person, and then another person walks into the room and demands something else. How do you negotiate with that? So there it is. The Canadian government claims they are all unified on what they want. They're all on the same page, and the U.S. is an absolute mess. Look, I'm not surprised. Restrictions on Canada's right to pursue independent global trade deals, veto power. So the U.S. wants to make Canada our bitch, and Canada's like, we ain't your bitch.
Canada just suspended trade negotiations with America after Donald Trump acted in bad faith and tried to make last-minute changes to the terms of their deal. So in a shocking statement made at around midnight last night, Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada announced that they are officially walking away from the negotiating table with America after 18 months of trying to get a fair deal in the works for both countries. And in his statement, Carney says that America tried to make last-minute changes that he deemed to be unfair, uneconomic, and threw into question the reliability of ever reaching a deal with the United States. And therefore, Carney says that Canada will begin to seek to build out and expand its trade relationships elsewhere. Now, that is the devastating part, because Canada is one of America's most reliable trading partners. And we know Donald Trump likes to slap tariffs on people, and he thinks that this gives him leverage and will make countries bend the knee to us. Sometimes it will. But this time, under Canada and Mark Carney, they are walking away from this deal. And in the letter, Carney acknowledges the fact that, quote unquote, America has changed, and then goes on to talk about how this might actually be good for Canada in the long term, citing how Canada has been creating 4 times as many jobs as America, how their non-US exports are set to double in the coming decade, and about how they have been attracting the most foreign investment of any G7 country. So it seems like Mark Carney is the one who has the leverage here. Not even trying to say that in a like, ooh, gotcha way, but this is a man who basically looked at the opponent, Donald Trump, who was sitting across from him at the negotiating table, and said, I cannot negotiate with this person. This person is irrational. This person wants to put 50% tariffs on me and has no interest in making a fair deal for the both of us. And therefore, Mark Carney is deciding to do the hard thing, walking away from the negotiating table, something he knows will likely cause some short-term pain for Canada and Canada's businesses, but ultimately is deciding that this is what's best for the country in the long run. And that is what I find to be the most devastating. We seemingly just lost Canada as a trading partner so long as Donald Trump is at the helm.
Here's a list of all the shitty things that happened to Trump this past weekend so you can start your week off right. First up, trade negotiations with Canada went south, prompting Trump to impose tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Canadian goods. And in return, the Prime Minister of Canada promised dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs. So we are now in a trade war with Canada. And I know what you might be thinking. Didn't Trump, Mr. Negotiation, say that they struck a deal? Yeah, he did. Twice. And he lied twice. Shocker. And speaking of tariffs, in an effort to lower prices, Trump decided to suspend tariffs on ground beef imports, which ended up just pissing off all of the farmers. A huge coalition of voters who has previously supported him and will be voting in this year's midterm. Not a good move for Trump. Republicans know this and they're angry about it. So he's been catching heat from all of them over this decision. Bad look for somebody with an already record low approval rating who needs to gain support before November, but who is actively losing it. Next up, an appeals court has confirmed that the federal prosecutor who subpoenaed Letitia James last year was unlawfully appointed, which seems to be a pattern with this administration, considering a judge has found that he unlawfully appointed multiple federal prosecutors not once, not twice, but 3 times. So his retaliation spree is not going well. And finally, the Natalie Harp letters were made public over the weekend. Natalie Harp is Trump's most devoted aide who seems to be obsessed with him. And these little notes definitely reflect that. Not a good look and seems to be an emerging scandal. And the last thing Trump needs right now is another scandal, especially one with a younger woman who's writing notes as unhinged as these. But you know what? I love to see it. Have a great week, everyone.
Hello everyone, my name is Rose, and Canada just made a move that many people never expected. It walked away from trade negotiations with Donald Trump rather than accept a deal it considered unfair. And now the relationship between the two longtime trading partners has entered a completely new chapter. For weeks, Canada and the United States had been negotiating with hopes of reaching an agreement that could ease the growing tariff war. But according to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, last-minute demands from Washington crossed a line Canada was not willing to accept, and Canada essentially said enough is enough. The breakdown came after the United States imposed 50% tariffs on roughly $20 billion worth of Canadian goods. Canada responded by suspending further trade discussions and preparing its own retaliation. What makes this situation so interesting is that Canada wasn't simply rejecting trade with America. Canada was rejecting the terms it believed came with the deal. Reports say Ottawa objected to demands involving areas such as steel quotas, dairy, Canada's French language protections, and restrictions on Canada's ability to develop trade relationships elsewhere. Prime Minister Mark Carney's message was essentially that Canada is willing to negotiate, but not at the expense of its sovereignty, economy, or national interest. And that is where this story becomes much bigger than tariffs. Canada and the United States have one of the world's most deeply connected trading relationships. Billions of dollars in goods cross the shared border, and businesses on both sides depend heavily on that relationship. So walking away is not without risk, but Canada appears to be betting that accepting a deal it considers damaging could create an even bigger problem in the long run. What do you think about today's discussion? I would like to hear more about what other people are saying.
So it turns out one of the reasons the trade deal fell apart was they wanted us to take the French off the labels. Oh man, you were arguing with us before, but now you're arguing with the French, and you don't want to argue with the French. You don't want to argue with the French because first off, you got no idea what they're saying, right? It's just and these aren't like regular French. French Canadian isn't French. It's a whole different thing. Like, don't think Creole friendly jambalaya. Think, backwoods meat pie, sugar shack, kind of thing you have nightmares about. So, we're just going to step back and good luck dealing with the French.
Now that trade negotiations between Trump's America and Mark Carney's Canada have completely fallen apart and a trade war is on the horizon again, we're starting to see some of the reasons as to why Canada chose to walk away, and they are so understandable. It turns out that among those last-minute demands from the United States, not only was America insisting that Canada should not be allowed to make any other trade deals in exchange for this trade deal, essentially limiting and restricting their ability to do other deals with, say, China or Europe, which are entities that Canada has had to get more friendly with as a result of consistent threats and harassment from the Trump administration. But that the Trump administration was also allegedly demanding that Canada scale back its use and protection of the French language in Canada. The Trump administration, who do nothing but whine about foreign interference in their elections and politics, were trying to tell Canada what language they should be speaking. I would make that face as well, frankly. 1/5 of Canadians speak French as their first language. Sizable chunks of Canadians in every province speak French. Therefore, things in Canada, trading stuff, government stuff, whatever, should also come in French. And the United States were trying to restrict that for some reason, because it's got anything to do with them, what language other people speak in their own country. Here are the two unknown levels of outrageous and delulu. These are the kinds of demands that the United States was pushing for at the very last minute in exchange for some cheap Jack Daniels. In exchange for a trade deal that would lock them out of the international market because Trump is a control freak, a bully, and a bit of a tsundere. Despite Trump's ambitions to take over Canada and make Canada a US state, which is never going to happen, all he's done is succeeded in making Canada more internally unified. All of the premiers of Canada, some of whom do not get on with Mark Carney because some of them are very liberal and some of them are very conservative, are all united behind the Canadian government in standing up to Trump. Meanwhile, Trump's approval ratings barely get out of the low 30s, with the vast majority of Americans being disgusted with him at this point. It says everything about the colossal gap between how powerful Trump and his administration is and how powerful they think they are. That they think they can barge in at the last minute and tell Canadians what language they should be speaking and trading in their own country. And demanding that Canada restrict itself from other trade agreements with international partners in exchange for a trade agreement with an increasingly isolated and economically irrelevant America. Canada had every reason to walk away and not look back. While the Trump administration is absolutely going to trash talk Mark Carney and Canada on Twitter, you know deep down they are very disappointed and very bitter that they are not able to achieve such an easy outcome as a trade deal with one of America's closest and longest standing trading partners. Or former, should I say, because that relationship is over, thanks to Donald Trump.
Canada just responded to Donald Trump's latest tariff threats by announcing that they will be deepening their economic, trade, and security relationships with Europe and the European Union. So, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced in a press conference this morning that this coming fall, Canada will, quote, begin intense discussions with the European Union to build a much stronger and deeper economic and security partnership. And he expressed optimism about this happening because he knows Canada is viewed as a, quote, trusted and reliable partner, which is a direct jab at Donald Trump's America, who, in Carney's initial announcement that he was walking away from the negotiating table, described Trump's America as, quote, untrustworthy and unreliable. And the timing of this press conference is significant because last night, Donald Trump announced on Truth Social that he would be placing a 50% tariff on Canadian imports such as trucks and automobiles set to begin January 1st, 2027. And I bet when Trump posted that, he thought it would get Mark Carney to crawl back to the negotiating table, trembling in fear. But instead, Carney is doubling down on his plan to wean off of American trade altogether, and Trump just pushed Carney and Canada further into the arms of Europe, where I believe Europe now, with Canada, will become stronger and will flourish more with trade economically. They will have better security. Meanwhile, America will become weaker and more isolated and poorer because a lot of our businesses depend on imports from Canada. But so long as Donald Trump is the president, that doesn't seem like it's going to be happening. This is really bad.
Canada is about to crush us economically in two different ways. First, you all remember those tariffs that Trump was threatening Canada with right before the wildfires kicked off a little over a month ago? Yeah, well, Canada just rejected the negotiation deals we had with them to work through those tariffs because in true Trumpian fashion, the negotiators dropped last-minute unrealistic conditions to the deal. One of the most ridiculous conditions is that the Canadian province of Quebec needed to give up on its laws protecting the French language and culture that is integral to Quebec. This and many other insane last-minute requests like having to match our economic sanctions on countries we have deemed as enemies were something that the Canadian government could not abide by. Obviously. The other way Canada is about to crush us economically is the fact that Canada has been helping us out with our little energy crisis, with the whole Strait of Hormuz situation going on by supplying us with oil. That's about to stop as Canada's largest oil refinery, Irving's Oil St. John facility, is going to shut down for maintenance in the fall. This refinery processes 300,000 barrels of oil a day and supplies gasoline and diesel to the northeastern states in the U.S. And this is absolutely going to affect your gas and utility prices coming in the fall and winter. And life's about to get rapidly more expensive in the coming weeks and months, and it's only one group of people's fault, the Republican Party. And yes, I'm also including anyone who says they're Republican or vote Republican, especially if you do it because you do it for the economy, because you know absolutely nothing about the real world, history, or just reality in general. And you're dragging us down to hell each and every day because you're too stupid, bigoted, and racist to think beyond your small, pathetic business or your Ford F-150 you need to drive around like you feel like you matter beyond just being the cattle that you are.
Good morning. As you wake up and drink your coffee, know that we have now entered a trade war with Canada while you were asleep. Yes, you heard that correctly. We are beefing with our northern partners. Canada suspended all trade negotiations with the Trump administration late last night at like 1 a.m. Why? Because Canada says that Trump was bringing in unfair economic practices and terms into their trade negotiations. So what happened now? There is a 50% tariff on $28 billion worth of goods coming in from Canada. And Canada says we're going to match that dollar for dollar to protect Canadians. Canada, one of our closest allies, literally right on our border, is now in a trade war with us. We currently have higher tariffs on most Canadian goods than we do on goods coming in from countries like China. It's a big slap in the face to the Trump administration and to Donald Trump because he claimed that we had a deal with Canada. Guess we didn't. So as I wake up this morning, because I slept 3 hours as my little 5-month-old daughter woke up every hour on the hour last night, I want you to know, and yes, she's laughing, I want you to know that this is no laughing matter. And in fact, we're now in a trade war with our closest ally, or I guess former. Follow for more.
Hey, what's up, America? Donald Trump, Canada trade negotiations. So it looks like trade negotiations with Canada have fallen through as the United States and Canada issue 50% tariffs on one another. The United States wanted concessions almost as the negotiations were ending, and the same with Canada. From what I understand, the United States was being very petty, something about the bilingual languaging on the packaging coming from Canada. But nevertheless, it looks like trade negotiations between the two countries have fallen through completely. And starting September 1st, we'll be paying 50% tariffs on things coming from Canada, and Canadians will be paying 50% tariffs on shit coming from us. And so this is a total shit show when it comes to trade between Canada and the United States. I don't know why Canada and America can't get along all of a sudden. We've been getting along fine for decade after decade, only all of a sudden to have this bullshit fall apart. I don't care for it. I like Canada, and I don't want 50% tariffs going back and forth as a dick measuring tool. Nevertheless, it looks like that's happening.
Donald Trump just put himself in the find out phase as his new trade deal with Canada has fallen apart, and he's the reason. Now, if you missed it a couple days ago, Donald Trump announced that a new trade deal with Canada was close to being finalized and would be signed in the next day or two. And Canada immediately responded, saying while they are negotiating, they're still a long ways away from a finalized deal. But now Canada is saying all negotiations are off and Trump is the reason. One, because he runs his mouth, but two, after things are finalized, certain terms, he comes back and demands more because Donald Trump sees himself as king of the world, that he simply has to demand it and it will happen. But now he's finding out countries are standing up to him, and more countries like China, Canada have to stand up to Donald Trump. While I'm American and I root for America to be the best, I certainly want to work with our friends and our allies. Canada has been nothing but fair to us throughout the years. They have been a very close partner, and Donald Trump is coming in and trying to make it all about him and ruining it, and now his new trade deal is off.
Now, the question is, who blinks first? Canada has announced retaliatory tariffs on about $20 billion worth of American imports, with measures ranging from 15% to 50% scheduled to take effect September 8th. And Canadians appear to be backing the government's harder stance. And a recent Angus Reid survey found that 76% of Canadians supported the decision to walk away from the negotiations. That doesn't mean Canadians want a trade war. It means many Canadians seem to believe that protesting their country's interest is worth taking a tougher position. So Canada didn't simply walk away from a trade deal. It walked away from a deal it believed asked for too much. And now both sides are staring at each other across one of the world's busiest borders. And the big question isn't whether Canada and America will continue trading. They almost certainly will. The real question is whether Washington and Ottawa can find a new agreement without either side feeling that it had to surrender. Because this time Canada has made its position very clear. Canada is willing to negotiate, but Canada is not willing to be pushed around. What do you think about today's conversation? Don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one.